Welcome everyone to the Firewood Banks webinar. So if you're here to talk Firewood Banks or learn more about Firewood Banks, you're in the right place. Go no further. My name is Josh Roberts. I'm the mitigation coordinator for the Larimer County Office of Emergency Management, and I'll be your host and MC today, this afternoon or this evening, for Jessica and Darian, I think, on the East Coast. And this webinar is brought to you in partnership with the Northern Colorado Fireshed Collaborative and the Alliance for Green Heat, obviously with Dr. Jessica Leahy with the University of Maine as our special guest. So before we get into, I'm going to let our partners introduce themselves real quick. But before we get into that, just a quick note about webinar administration. So note that we're recording this webinar, and that is because following the webinar in the next few weeks or so, we'll find a place to hang it on our website, and then we can distribute that link out to you all and to others who aren't able to make it today. Also, everyone should have been muted upon joining the webinar, and I'll sort of be on the lookout for some random audio. We'll make sure to keep folks muted unless you're speaking. If you do have a question, so we've got some time baked into the agenda today for a Q&A session towards the end of the webinar. But I think Jessica and Darian, if okay with you, I'd probably like to open it up for a couple of questions after each one of your presentations as well. It's just some great information. So if you do have a question, if you don't mind, just raise your hand in your Zoom control features and I'll call on you. Then you can ask your question, or also feel free to type it in the chat if you don't want to lose your question, and I'll monitor the chat as we go. So with that, let me turn it over to a couple of the presenters to just say a few words. So how about Dr. Leahy? Let's start with you. Want to just introduce yourself real quickly?
Yeah, I'm Jessica Leahy. I'm a forestry professor at the University of Maine. I've been here for about 18 years. Before that, I was born and raised in Alaska, went to Oregon State University and the University of Minnesota. And I've been involved with wood banks for about over a decade now.
Awesome. Thanks, Jessica. And then Darian, how about yourself? Go ahead and introduce
Yeah.
yourself.
So I'm Darian. I'm a policy analyst with the Alliance for Green Heat. They're based out of Maryland, but I remote work from Arkansas, actually. So we're a bit of a team across the nation. And I've been with the Alliance for about a year and a half now, and I didn't know about firewood banks until I joined. So this is also kind of a newer concept that I've really thrown myself at because it's really great. It feels good, and you're doing good. Yeah, there I am.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, you guys. And Karina Marshall with the Fireshed Collaborative wasn't able to make it today quite yet, but certainly she extends her warm welcome and hellos to everyone. So the next item, just real quick, here's the agenda somewhere in here. So we're doing welcome and introductions now. Dr. Leahy's going to talk about firewood banks, what they are, how to set one up, how to run it, those kind of things. And then Darian is going to dive in a little deeper to the Alliance for Green Heat's Firewood Bank Assistance Program, a grant opportunity, which some of you may qualify for, or communities or neighborhoods who might qualify. So, and then we'll do some Q&A, but like I said, we'll probably Dr. Lee, after your talk, we'll offer a few minutes if anyone has any questions at that point. Then, simple agenda today. So let's just get started with the show. And Dr. Leahy, if you don't mind, let me unshare my screen, and then you can share yours if you'd like, and then you just take it away.
All right, sounds good. There, are you seeing the slides?
Yep, got it.
Okay, awesome. Well, what I prepared for you is a discussion of how to start and run a wood bank with some definitions and some examples of wood banks. My key takeaway for you is that there is no one correct way to start and run a wood bank. It really should be tailored to your community, your volunteers, your wood source. There's so many variables that there's just a lot of variability in wood banks, no right or wrong way. so long as you're providing safe seasoned wood for people with heating insecurity. So I'll sort of talk about some ways for how to make it a grassroots bottom up kind of approach to designing something that would potentially work for your community. And so it's good to start with both photos of wood banks, but also just to define them. And I think it's really easy to make that analogy to a food bank. We're far more familiar with food banks than we are with firewood banks. But just like people who are facing food insecurity can access food at a food bank, it's the same thing for wood banks. There's people can come or have delivered firewood for little or no cost. They can vary in size. And it's really important, as some of us were talking about just a little bit before the webinar started, is that wood banks have they've sort of increased in formality and in the terminology used about them. But neighbors have shared firewood with each other. Religious organizations have helped folks in their community. Wood banks have been around for a very long time and just not necessarily called a wood bank. So you may have one already in your community that just doesn't call itself that. I know a forester who in the 70s, that was one of his first assignments when he became a county forester, was to go split wood for a wood bank that was based out of one of the churches. In part, they're becoming more formal because of the great effort of Alliance for Green Heat that Darian will talk about, and this assistance program that really has a goal, with thanks to funding from USDA Forest Service and the state and private and tribal forestry wood utilization program, to really increase and ramp up the number of wood banks across the nation. This assistance program has a really low bar of entry that Darian will talk about. And so I can't give enough credit to the work that Alliance for Green Heat is doing to really nationalize these sorts of efforts. Here are some more photos of people stacking wood in different ways, running splitters, wood being delivered, split, wood banquets you can host if you have a bunch of volunteers. The thing is that they're all different. Some are providing just an emergency supply of firewood to get someone through the night. So here in Maine, we think a lot about pipes freezing. You may have that too. And you just need to get someone through until they can maybe access other programs. Maybe it's a supplemental heat source, things like that. Others are providing much more of a wood supply. So a quarter cord, 1 cord, 2 cords, trying to help get people a little bit further along in terms of their winter heating needs. The other thing that varies is how many people are involved. So I know of at least one person wood bank that is just one woman and a neighbor who stock wood down at the mailbox, and people can come and grab wood if they need it, to far more formalized, more than 100 cords affiliated with these other organizations like tribal governments, United Way, things like that. Wood sources can vary from street trees that are being cut down. You know, we think a lot about that as a forest health thing. So you don't want to move wood too far if it's had a pest or disease. So it's a way to use wood locally. Others, I'm very, Massachusetts has a lot of state support for their wood banks, including wood supply. I believe the statistic is about half are religiously affiliated and half are not, but it can be non-NGOs, it can be neighbors, it can be any sort of group. Some utilize town sites, municipal sites, including transfer stations, like dump areas and things like that. The key thing that cuts across all of them is that there are volunteers. And so this is a wonderful thing if you love volunteer management, recruiting volunteers, all the ways that you can keep volunteers happy. And that's one of the potentially far unappreciated, although I try to mention it as much as I can when I talk about wood banks. The volunteers get so much out of this, and it can draw in your community maybe volunteers who aren't engaged in other volunteer activities. There is a special kind of person that loves splitting wood, and they will come weekly to split wood. And there's a lot of fellowship and camaraderie. Um, and so I think if that's also part of your goal of maybe getting community members engaged who aren't going to volunteer at the library or aren't going to volunteer in this other setting, but they might split wood, and they might not admit it, but they might really like splitting wood with other people. That there's a lot of benefits to the volunteers themselves. Sabrina Vivian was a student of mine, and we put out this community guide to starting and running a wood bank. And so I've got the link. I'll mention it a couple of times, but the easy link is tinyurl.com/firewood bank guide. In it, we've got examples of wood banks of all different kinds, different sizes, different allotment methods, different vetting processes for clients and things like that. And it's got in the appendix something you might use in a community meeting to just talk through how's it going to work in your area? What's the best site? Where's the wood going to come from? What equipment do you want to use? To have that discussion. We don't prescribe really the best way to start and run a wood bank, but we give you the things to think about to make it adapt to your area. And so it's a very cool story of Sabrina. She was a ecology and environmental science student. You might have opportunities to engage students in your wood banks. She interviewed all of the wood banks we could find in New England back in 2013, 2014. At that time, there were 10 that we could find. That number has tripled in the last decade. So there's just an increasing number of wood banks. And this fed that community guide that she wrote. One of the things that we found is, and questions we had from folks was, is it a good idea to have a wood bank in my community? And I would say there's commonly what we find are three categories of people who benefit as recipients of firewood. So you have older residents who are on fixed income, who are struggling with all the other costs of housing and medication and things like that. You have people with disabilities that might like to go cut their own firewood and process it, but they're not physically able to do so. Yet they really want to heat with wood, or that's their best option given their other heating source options. And then there is a third category of people who have these sort of unexpected life events. And so we see people who have lost their jobs, who are going through a divorce and moving to a single income, and also people that have these unexpected housing things. So in Maine, we heat with oil furnaces, and when your furnace goes out, that is a bill that many households cannot immediately replace their furnace system, but they might have a wood stove as backup. And so that might be what they need to do to get through that particular winter. So if you think about your area, I would think, and I would look and see if you have these sort of heating insecurity indicators. Do people have high housing cost burden? Do you have a level of poverty in your area? But we've also found that even in areas that are stereotypically very wealthy, that there's often inequality within the community, and that there are people who would benefit from a firewood bank. The other thing we look at is people, we try to, it's most effective in communities where people do have wood stoves. And there's some really imperfect measures of that. The best that we have is the American Community Survey, which is available online to look at primary home heating. That doesn't pick up people who have it as a secondary home heating source, and it doesn't pick up households in which that's their, not intended, but the furnace breaks and they're going to use a wood stove temporarily. Sabrina pulled together all of the wood bank organizers and leaders in a summit, and that again was even more information for this community guide that she put together. She coincidentally now is in Colorado. So after she left the University of Maine, she got her master's degree in sustainability at the University of Michigan and is now living and working in renewable energies in Denver. So she's right there. She actually, if you started a wood bank, she would love an invitation to come see this because she stays in touch. She loves that this project has continued to have a life after her graduation. She was a first gen college student. She was a Mitchell Scholar, one of our special programs, and so it's a great story of how it impacted a student and led to these great outcomes for her as well as these wood banks. So let's get into some ideas of things that you're gonna maybe want to consider. So one of the biggest hurdles for wood banks getting started is where to have the wood bank itself, the firewood bank. Municipalities, towns often have, or counties often have space that can work. Sometimes municipalities have liability concerns. And so you'll see some going to church sites, to private construction folks, arborists. I would keep an open mind as you look to site your wood bank and try to find a willing host is your key thing that you want. Another thing I'll mention is that processing firewood, you often think, oh, I need a big field or whatever. But actually, that can be quite on a practical level, that can get the wood quite muddy. And so, if you can think about a more hardened surface, gravel pavement, something like that, you're going to be able to keep the wood a little cleaner, which will help with the processing side of things. You also want to think about your volunteers, and you know your community best and where the volunteers are, where there's volunteer capacity, where perhaps they're tapped out. And so we see some wood banks relying a lot on big blitzes with corporate engagement. We also see ones where they have a particular splitting season and they have volunteers who come weekly. And some just rely on regular call outs for volunteers. Others use youth for stacking, maybe not the chainsaw and splitter work, but for stacking. There's another wood bank that has sort of like missionaries come and they do volunteer work and they do the stacking. So this is one that it's really you want to make sure you have enough volunteers, but there's no right way to access those. I will say another one of my favorite wood banks here in Maine is the Booth Bay Woodchucks, and their average age is about 80, and their target volunteer population are senior men looking for physical activity, and they've had a steady supply of volunteers in that category. So it's a gamut. You know your community best. For firewood sources, this is something I'm very I don't know much about Colorado, so I'm really interested in where your good firewood species, where you would access that, and in what quantities, and you want to make sure you've got enough coming, enough firewood. But again, these sizes can really vary. So we have several wood banks in Maine that will process small numbers of volunteers, 5 to 8 cords a year. And then we have others that are much over 100 plus cords. So think about that's this intertwining of your volunteer base, your site limitations and size, how much wood you can get from the different sources. And then it all kind of congeals into what that wood bank is for your community. Processing is another thing to consider. And so how are you going to split the wood? What will you put it in? It's very important that wood be seasoned. If you burning wet wood is not great efficiency, not great for air quality. It's not an efficient burn. Really, Alliance for Green Heat is going to ask you to have a moisture meter and make sure that you're giving out dry wood. And so you need to think about processing ahead of time, where you're going to store it in a covered fashion, whether with tarps in a shed or a barn, something like that. So you want to think through that. And wood banks have moderated their size based on that. They've done fundraising for sheds to make sure that they've got the storage for that. And Others have decided to do a distribution system. And so rather than process all at one site, or even they might process at one site and then store in sheds around the county to make sure that the wood is getting into different places. But you might, in other situations, you might want to process at multiple sites. Then you want to think through your equipment. What do you have? What do you want? What can you access through the Alliance for Green Heat grant? There's lots of people that love to get into this part of it with different splitters and which splitter is best, and do you want a processor or not? Lots of options here. And, you know, it depends on how gung-ho you want to go about it. I would recommend starting small and seeing if people like it and scaling up. Other people say go right for it because you might want liability insurance. You might want to access the grant right away. So I think it depends on the appetite again of your community for what you want to do and the mechanical skills, your volunteers and maintenance, your safety concerns, things like that. So then legalities and liabilities. So Alliance for Green Heat can connect you to liability forms that other wood banks are using. Also, we have some information about insurance companies that are willing to provide liability insurance. Nationally, I think this about 80% of all firewood banks carry liability insurance. So it is possible. Some are housed within the umbrella organization of either the town, the church, the larger community service, social service nonprofit will roll it into one of their programs and have their parent liability extended to include the wood bank. So lots of options here, but you want to think about it. You know, I think our stance would be that liability insurance covers injuries is a good practice. Regardless of what you decide to do, I would definitely have a safety plan, a written safety training for new volunteers, regular safety briefings so that all volunteers are reminded of safety considerations. You might consider different categories of tasks. So who gets to chainsaw, who gets to stack, who gets to split. The good news is that injuries are very rare at firewood banks. They tend to be of squished fingers and strained backs. And so many of those can be avoided by having a good, robust safety plan. But there have been some more serious, you know, particularly squishing fingers in splitters cannot turn out the way that you want. So, you know, there, yeah, we are working on best practices for that. You often think you want two people running a splitter, but there can be, you may want to think about having a single person running the splitter, things like that. Okay. Everyone wants to know, how do you vet who gets firewood? This is a photo of firewood being distributed to a house where it's driven to them and done. This again runs the complete gamut. So there are some wood banks who don't vet the recipients at all. They assume if someone is coming and asking for firewood, that they need firewood. And they feel good about that process, and they feel that people are not taking advantage of them, and that the lower administrative burden of not getting into extra paperwork, not getting into people's business, that is a sufficient trade-off for any abuse that may be occurring. There are other groups, though, that do feel strongly about this, and that's fine too. One thing that they've done is that have either their parent organization, if they're part of a social service nonprofit, or a partner nonprofit, do that vetting for them. And so if someone applies for LIHEAP funding, they'll get maybe a voucher to go to the firewood bank or something like that. And then that way the wood bank, which is often a bunch of people who just love splitting wood, don't need to get into that level of detail about the recipients. And so I would, if you do want to vet people, I would encourage partnering with someone who might be able to, you know, already have processes for confidentiality and things like that. Okay, the timing. Again, totally varies. Key is to get seasoned wood to recipients when they need it. So you've got to time out that time period to let that wood season. But some wood banks are processing wood year round. Others are taking that blitz approach. There's no right or wrong way. You just got to think it through. Same with distribution. So some wood banks have people come to them. Some wood banks process and have sheds throughout the county that people can then go to. Others use volunteers to drive wood to the recipients. Others have larger equipment like a 4-core dump truck or something like that. There's a lot of options here, but you do want to think through moving wood. The wood banks that I've personally volunteered at have people come to them, and then that then is a driving factor in how much wood people take. People will show up in some of the worst vehicles that you can imagine, and you're loading firewood into, vehicles that are not made to carry that sort of weight, so they need to take a smaller amount and things like that. So think through your distribution. Same with allotment size. That's another, there's no right or wrong. And some wood banks are focused on that real emergency supply. Others are trying to provide people with a more wood to get them through a longer period of time, a couple weeks, a month, things like that. You'll want to think through security. So this idea of seasoning the wood means you need to have wood split, stacked, and seasoning over a period of time. Some wood banks have had thefts, and so you want to think through what level of security do you want. I do know of wood banks who have the wood split and it's ungated. The one I'm thinking of in Princeton, Maine, has a gate that could be locked, but Ernest has decided not to gate it. Hasn't had any theft yet, and I think he assumes if someone comes and steals the wood, maybe they needed it. So again, it's up to you what level of security you'd like. And then you want to think through your partnerships as you're doing this design. One is partnerships that help you get the word out about your firewood bank. So your organizations that are interacting with people who might have heating insecurity so that they can get connected to what you have. Urban foresters and arborists have wood that they're often cutting from the urban environment, and they need to dump that wood. Sometimes they're having to pay for that. There's just a constant battle for arborists on what do they do with these trees. Having a wood bank as an outlet could be great. You also have perhaps small woodland owners, private forest owners. You might have state lands. You might have the National Forest is supplying wood banks. Kind of depends. It could be access to volunteers, but just kind of I recommend brainstorming partnership possibilities to see what might help your firewood bank. And thinking about longevity. And so another thing that I've observed is that these firewood banks often have a catalyst, someone who is so passionate about getting the firewood bank started. I think this is common among many community volunteer groups. And so there's some risk of firewood banks, once that person loses interest, their health declines, they are unable to do it for whatever reason, that the wood bank could be in jeopardy. So thinking through, are you going to have multiple officers, multiple leaders? What will be the plan to ensure that it continues? I think this is especially important if you participate in the Alliance for Green Heat Assistance Program, because it's going to be providing frequently equipment. And it would just be a real shame to take this federal funding and have it not to just sort of peter out. So I think having a good longevity plan is important. So again, this easy link is I went fast, so I'd recommend reading through this guide, going through it, and then at the appendix there is that wood bank checklist for having a planning meeting and talking about what you think might work and working through all of these key points, and as you kind of and end up with something, try it, and have an adaptive model for seeing what works. And that's my last slide. So Josh, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much, Jessica. And I wrote down a couple of notes, but the first thing I say is I love the story about that county forester and their first job splitting wood, and how I mean, it's just such a a really commonsensical, sort of simple concept to really help affect a lot of good in a number of ways. And, on that note, I might, mention, I like you broke out what may be causing a need for a firewood bank. Here in Larimer County, we also have a challenge with dealing with some of the biomass that results from a lot of our forest health or wildfire mitigation treatment. So I also see this as a way to help consider that biomass, that wood, as a resource to use and not necessarily something to dispose of. So I might offer that. And you mentioned, our type of wood. We've got a lot of soft pines, not a whole heck of a lot of hickory, which saddens me because I love hickory flavored barbecue, but mixed conifer forest, a lot of ponderosa pine, lodgepole pine. That's sort of our indicative of our forest type in the area. But you guys, y'all get enough of hearing me, those of you on the call. So let me be quiet and let me just turn it over to those of you who are on the call. If I can take a few minutes, Jessica, any questions for Jessica around wood banks and what they are, how to run them, those kind of things? I see no questions. That means you did a fantastic job of
I
explaining. Oh, hey,
I
hey,
think
Tom, go ahead.
Tom has one, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
I was just wondering, is it always one organization, or is it one organization that is in charge of withdrawals, and then you have other organizations come and go that make deposits to the bank?
Yeah, Darian has a lot of exposure too, so she should chime in. So, uh, some wood banks are very loosely organized, and so it might even just be three individuals who found a spot, someone willing to have let them process wood there. Um, uh, Others kind of have are their own standalone, whether they've actually gone through the process of becoming a nonprofit or not, but they kind of have their own group identity. And then others are these offshoots of frequently nonprofits or churches. Um, and yeah, like the ones that use corporate volunteers or have high school service, those are other organizations kind of interacting as well. What what we're getting to here in Maine is an idea of networking existing wood banks. So we've kind of got this critical mass of wood banks. They have these common things that they're trying to deal with, like citing and liability, arranging their liability insurance, and they're having to explain what a firewood bank is. And if we had group insurance, they could maybe all be under there. Some of the bigger equipment too, that's beyond what the Alliance for Green Heat grant can support is something also that could be shared if it was thoroughly clean to prevent any forest pest or invasive plant transfer. They could also share. So the idea of a processor with a conveyor belt and stuff could be kind of rotate through over time between the wood banks to kind of help them speed up some of their process, which is currently very manual. Uh, so it's a complicated answer, Tom, because it's highly variable for what you have going on in your community and what sort of works.
Tom, you're
Oh,
still muted, bud.
yeah, you muted.
There we go.
There you go.
We've been focused on fire mitigation, so we've been clearing roads and hauling away branches, and then the trunks we leave by the side of the road because we figure somebody will pick them up for firewood, and somebody usually does. But this would be a better use of that wood. But it's very sporadic, and it's not like we're trying to keep the supply chain filled for a wood bank, but we definitely generate some firewood sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, you wouldn't want probably the people coming to get that firewood currently need that firewood, so you wouldn't want to sort of take away that. But I do like how firewood banks let older people, differently abled people, or people who are in that unexpected cost that they can't afford. They're often working, and they're in a real jam with mortgage, car payments, and they're going to try to get out of that as soon as possible. But they can't go out and do what those folks are currently doing. They don't have a truck, they don't have a chainsaw, they don't have the physical ability or the time availability to do it. So I like how it lets other people, because I don't know about you, but heating with wood, it just makes you feel good. It like warms your bones in a better way than a lot of heating sources. And so the quality of life that you provide to some people, if they have a safe, reliable wood stove to burn with, can be really important, particularly people that grew up heating with wood. Being able to keep that tradition is important for some people in that quality of life issue.
Darian, did
Patrice.
you have anything to add? And then
Oh, sorry.
Patrice, it's okay. Then Patrice, I see your hand raised. Go ahead, Darian.
Yeah, I mean, I think what comes to mind is that a lot of the times, and this is from experience out in Arizona on the Hopi and the Navajo Nation, they will have a firewood bank who they fell a lot of their trees. They have partnerships inside the national forest, and then they will connect with existing firewood banks and say, listen, we have these logs, come get them, or they'll process it, have the firewood banks pick it up, that kind of thing. So a lot of, once you know of a couple of firewood banks, that kind of coordination happens a lot already. I will say, I mean, in reference to the grant, we are funding those that are like processing their own, because we've actually had this question of like, could there be a satellite where it's like they process and they have these own firewood banks and they're distributing the processed wood, and we were like, we really want the grants to go towards a firewood bank that's processing their own wood. So that's kind of like a limitation there. But we've definitely seen where maybe some people are felling and it's part of their firewood bank operation, and they've shared kind of the sources in that way.
Yep. Awesome. Thanks. Go ahead, Patrice.
So up where we are in the mountains, we've recently in the last 10 years had beetle killed trees, and there's concern up here about moving wood off of properties and possibility carrying the infection or diseases to another new location and reinfecting healthy trees. So any thoughts about that? How you tell the community, or is that a real valid concern?
It's absolutely a valid concern. I don't know specifically about your particular beetle, but in general, uh, we're dealing with emerald ash borer, Asian longhorn beetle. Everybody's got their pest du jour, it seems. So, yes, one of the best things you can do is keep wood local and not move wood as much. And that is really good for forest health reasons, so that you're not moving those pests around. The state forestry agency, I'm not sure what it's called in Colorado. Here it's the Maine Forest Service. They have forest health experts, and so I would bring them on. They might even have what's called a wood utilization specialist. This Maine is about to move in that direction. Massachusetts has I believe they have a whole national network of these wood utilization folks, and they can in partnership and having consulting with them, they can let you know if you're in a quarantine zone and how far wood can be moved and what the recommendation is for your forest pest. With our pests, we're trying to not move firewood more than 50 miles from where they are. But that's going to vary based on where you are. So bring your state forestry experts in to help with that. The other reason to keep wood local is the sort of what helps make it even more of a renewable resource and just minimizing your fossil fuel usage. So moving firewood is heavy, it's dense, and when you take it long distances, you're using a lot of gas to do that. And so there's also environmental reasons to keep wood as local as possible. In many cases, some of that wood is moving. You would actually be reducing the amount that the wood is moved, depending on the situation. So I think there's logistical, there's environmental, and there's forest health reasons to keep wood as local as possible.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Patrice. Great question. And one thing I might add, Jessica, I mean, that's to me, that's one of the, intents behind this concept here is to use wood more local and move it less. And, I think these firewood banks, certainly for a number of our mountain communities, it would allow for some of that, for all those reasons, plus more that you mentioned. So yeah, good call. Kelly, see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Unmute myself. Hi, thanks for doing this. This is fascinating and a great idea. I was thinking about what you said, the analogy with being similar to a food bank. And I was wondering if there's a way, because we do have so many residents that are mitigating their own properties and it's expensive and it's daunting because you don't know what to do with it. If they could take this wood to a food bank, a wood bank, that would be great. But have you heard of anybody incentivizing them, or is it possible to monetize, like if you were making a donation to the Goodwill or you're making a donation to a real food bank, to where you could get them, I know that's a 15% tax credit for some of those things when you're doing that. If you could get a local that has too much wood on their property, they have an incentive then to take this to the wood bank and they'll get a tax credit for it, like you would get for when you take your stuff to the Goodwill, you get your little receipt to use, so that you're getting a win-win-win-win-win thing and giving somebody a reason to do it, to feel good, and to do it to help in April, right?
I love it. I don't know any states that are doing that. So I think you have the opportunity to be a leader there. We've worked on federal policy kinds of issues in terms of expanding LIHEAP and being more friendly, more accommodating of firewood and firewood banks. But the untapped area is probably state policy, trying to get state lands to supply wood banks, providing state incentives. Maybe in places where there are strong counties, there could be some county incentives. But so I'm not aware of any, but I love that idea of, if it is a barrier for folks, or if it would help encourage more supply, that'd be awesome.
Right. Or perhaps the food bank could be a nonprofit, and the donation to that nonprofit may knock down some of those barriers if that's already in place. You just have to know how to monetize the value of that wood, which I'm not a woodhead, so I don't know what would, maybe I am a woodhead. I guess I shouldn't say that. Um, but it would probably be easy to figure out what wood is worth and figure out something that way, so that that nonprofit then could consider that a donation of some sort.
Yeah. I think that'd be your state wood utilization specialist, if you have one who keeps track of various stumpage prices and would be able to give you what private market firewood is going for, and have a sense of that. So yeah,
Yeah,
love
and
it.
Kelly, I'm sorry, Jessica, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I love it. Can't wait to see what you come up with.
Yeah, I love that idea. And I wrote down a note to contact our state's, the Colorado State Forest Service's wood utilization person to ask that. Also, I'm not a tax accountant or a tax professional, but I mean it makes total sense, to evaluate that donated wood somehow for a little tax write-off. But again, don't take tax advice from me, please. Um, Bobby, I see your hand up. So we'll take your question, and then I'd like to move on to Darian's presentation, and then we'll offer up some more time if we can. But go ahead, Bobby.
We also do fire mitigation area, but we also do a community cleanup day once a year. In fact, it's coming up on June 8th. OEM is going to be able to do preparedness training for us on that date as well. But basically, we have a community truck, and what we do is we've already announced to our community to go ahead and start their mitigation around their homes, and basically to bring all their stuff down to their curbside, which there really aren't any curbs. We're in the mountains, but basically bring their stuff down, and I'm going to be hauling a chipper behind me, and we'll chip it in place or take it with us. And what we do with that wood is we do have many seniors who could no longer cut their wood. And we're also doing a couple different fire breaks as well as some home mitigations in our community. So we're pretty active in accumulating wood. We don't seem to be having any problems with distributing it yet. But the question I was leading to was, and it kind of gets to, I think, what I can't remember, Kelly, I think it was, but basically, Is there a network within Colorado, Josh, that if we did have excess wood, we would know where to go? Like we're pretty close to Pinewood Springs. It would be pretty much nothing for us to take stuff down there once we feel we have excess. But you know, I know at some point we're probably going to hit that.
Yeah, Bobby, you're spot on. And honestly, I think that, to me, there's a little bit of a field of dreams, approach I see maybe possibly happening here. If you build it, they will come. So what it would be awesome from my perspective to see a few community oriented firewood banks like we're talking about in y'all's communities, and then you guys can help one another out. You can share some means to keep up the firewood, in that firewood bank with other, community partners, whether they're private property owners, other communities nearby to yours. They have a place now to sort of offload, some of that firewood that's beneficial for other reasons, to help those who might need it. So to simple answer to your question is, to my knowledge, there's not one in our area, a network that you speak of that's sort of mature. I know there's a few different nodes of firewood banks throughout the state, of Colorado, but oftentimes it's like what you guys are mentioning. You're coming off a project, you're bucking it, and you're not even splitting it. You're leaving it on the side of the road, and people pick it up. But I think that there is a good way to take some of these things that Jessica and what Darian is going to talk to you about and move it into an approach that really helps target those who might need it. In addition, it just increases our ability to handle that wood biomass by giving some different outlets for people to take stuff. So I'd love to see that be developed, but we would need y'all's help to develop it. So if that answers your question. All right. And Darian, I want to turn it over to you, but I kind of want to give you a segue, at least a question to ponder or maybe speak to. One of the comments that you had made, you said that grants are really only for those that process their own firewood. And so just some clarification, are grants, and you'll probably talk about this in terms of, eligibility sake, but are these grants for folks who process only their own firewood, or who process their own firewood from their own sort of community treatments, and also have a way to accept feedstock from some of these other partner organization larger treatments? So a question just keep in the back of your mind. You can answer it now or during your presentation, up to you.
Yeah, sure. I'll get to that when I go to the eligibility, because that's a great question. So let me get this shared up here. All right, perfect. So first, quickly, like I said, I'm with the Alliance for Green Heat. In short, we often advocate for wood heating and pellet heating in the energy transition, so getting it integrated into the future of green energy. But really advocating for lower income rural folks who want and need to use wood heat in certain circumstances, so making sure they don't get left behind as we move into the future. So a bit of a program overview. So this funding came out of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act. We began in 2022. It's a 5-year program, and so we're beginning year 3 now. And so that was $8 million for firewood banks. We don't get all of that. Of course, it goes to our partners in academic research or off to regional offices who are distributing larger amounts for larger projects, that kind of thing. So we do get a pretty big chunk of it, though. And we do administer this in partnership with the U.S. Forest Service. And so a big goal for us is just getting resources out to firewood banks. And this is, of course, money, funding, but it's also, how do we connect people to proper training, safety? How do we get them linked into existing programs like BurnWise to burn better wood more efficiently? So we're really trying to kind of like make those connections. We want to expand the network of firewood banks. And we really want to help firewood banks deliver more seasoned wood. That's big for us. We know it's more efficient. We know it's safer for people. And so in the first 2 years, our project totals a total of 80 firewood banks over 24 different states. 47% of those are operated by nonprofits or community groups or towns, that kind of thing. 31% operated by or primarily serving tribal lands or tribes. And then 19% operated by faith-based organizations. And these could be churches or these could be nonprofits that are like faith mission driven. And then 3% operated by businesses. And that may be interesting That's firewood dealers most of the time who would like to give away firewood, so they find a community partner, and they in that way are able to have a nonprofit side to their firewood business, and that was new for this last year. And just kind of an overview of where we have funded people. It's so broad, so variable. And when we talk about the different kinds, like Jessica said, there's no right or wrong way to be a firewood bank, and they're all so very different. So when you're looking in the Northeast, some of them are doing large quantities, some of them are doing small quantities. When you look in the Southwest, some of these people are doing 1,000 cords for their tribal lands. So from small to big, so very different. And we've got to learn a ton from having this many different kind of grantees across the US. And so for everyone, this is what you really come for here. It's the 2024-2025 grant opportunity. It is open now for new existing firewood banks and for those that want to start a firewood bank. And those are up to 15,000 for new applicants. So these are people who have existing firewood banks but have not received funding from the Alliance for Green Heat before. And then the startups who are planning on delivering at least 5 cords of wood in the upcoming heating season, or at least within a year. And then renewals, not as big a deal for y'all. I don't think anyone's on here that has applied for firewood bank funding in the past, but that is also something, if you want to pass that along to people you do know, we have renewals opening up in September 1st later this year. We really wanted to have that kind of differentiation so we can really jump in and expand on startups and those that haven't received funding. So we broke up kind of that opening. And we do have 875,000, which is the most we've ever had before to give out to firewood banks. That's up from last year, which I think was around 650,000. So that's super exciting. And we want to be able to get that funding out as quickly as possible. A large part of that is showing like there is a need. So we can show US Forest Service, like, look, this money is flying out, or we can go to Congress people and ask them, this need is in your community, and look where this funding has gone, and we need more. So it's a large part of like showing need. And so when we go to this eligible expense, almost any item is available for expense. And this is something we often bring, someone will put into their budget, and we'll have to discuss it every week, basically, like, is this an eligible expense? And we'll kind of walk through our process and be like, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. We've never heard of it before, but that's cool. An example of that is a warming hut. A firewood bank last year put that in. I mean, it's a huge deal for the safety of your volunteers. It's also about kind of longevity and the sustainability of your volunteers. If you want them to come back, you want them to be happy. But we can't allow these expenses because of federal regulations to go towards food and drink, although that is a huge part of firewood banks. People bringing food to their volunteers, feeding their volunteers, it is big. That's awesome, and we encourage that. We just can't allow the expenses to go to that. Neither entertainment or lobbying or items over 5,000, which is the big deal here. People have gotten creative to get around this, but really be eligible. And that's buying used equipment. So trailers or trucks that they need, they can buy used. That's totally eligible. And you can also, we've had someone order a log splitter, but if they would have included shipping costs, it would have been over 5,000. So they drove over 1,000 miles to get their log splitter, and that qualifies. That's fine. Or also when you look here for sheds and carports for tool storage and wood drying, instead of buying a prefab storage shed or carport that's over 5,000, you can buy the materials to build that carport or shed or whatever, and that can be under the 5,000. So getting creative is a big deal to get over the 5,000. We're hoping that will lift one day. That's a rule within the U.S. Forest Service and the federal agencies, and we're in the process of getting that renegotiated, but it's a long process, as everyone knows in the government. So that's what it is today. But some examples, of course, are your chainsaws and log splitters. Something that some people don't think about are smoke and carbon monoxide detectors. That's totally eligible if you want to group order those, batch order, wholesale, whatever, and then give them out to recipients. Totally good. Conveyor belts, trailers, like I said. Gas for delivery vehicles. A portion of that can go there. Labor expenses. We've had particularly for maybe tribal admins who have paid people, a portion of that can go. And also, particularly in Massachusetts, where they contract out some of their labor for processing, so on site, and that can go to labor. And then liability insurance, which is not required. Liability waivers are, but liability insurance is just encouraged, because we know that's a huge deal. And we have had some people, like Jessica was talking about, your partner organization can kind of cover or be an umbrella under maybe a church policy or a larger nonprofit or your fiscal sponsor. But we highly encourage that. And if you need to pay for a few months for liability insurance, that's totally eligible. Another thing is Firewood Bank signage. So if you want something that, announces your Firewood Bank, that's eligible. If you want to put up safety training, volunteer orientation, any of that kind of thing, eligible. And then the maintenance of equipment. So a big deal for us is making sure that this goes towards, sustainable use. And so keeping the equipment ready, clean, and in good health, as I would say, it's just better for everyone. It's better, it's a safer equipment, and you make sure to increase longevity of equipment so you're not having to constantly change that out. And some of the grant requirements, this first one can be a big deal. It might not be as big a deal for y'all. This is usually community groups that have a problem with this, but you do need a UEI to be able to receive funds. And we have an example today. Someone got their UEI within a day, which is kind of incredible, but it can happen that fast. And other times people have had a much longer process, but our grant manager, Pam Porter, she's awesome. She can help you walk through that. And she has a lot of different examples of how people have gotten that. Another thing is that you do have to have a safety plan in place. So this means having a safety coordinator, naming that safety coordinator, posting an emergency information sheet where volunteers can see that. So if a situation happens, they know the address of their Firewood Bank or the GPS coordinates if you're somewhere else. They know the nearest hospital. They know the safety coordinator's name and numbers, whatever. That's something that we're requiring new this year. And we have a template for you to be able to fill out if you'd like. And the other thing is PPE. So if you don't have the required personal protective equipment, then we do ask that you include that in your grant budget just for safe practices. Of course, you need a bank account or a fiscal sponsor as your bank account. And this can't be like an individual's name. It has to be, you can even just create a separate account and just have the Firewood Bank, blah, 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 bank account. And that works for us. You also do need a liability waiver, like I mentioned. We have a template for that as well. Something where you can just basically put your Firewood Bank in and have and then it's good to go. And that you do need a moisture meter. When we ask in the application, do you have a moisture meter? And if you don't, put that in your grant budget. That's a big deal for us, especially with our partners at Burnwise. We push those moisture meters to get firewood under 20% at least to distribute. And then some of the kind of like reporting or financial requirements is a 2-week interim report where 80% of funds need to be spent. That is something that has been a hurdle for a lot of people, and a lot of questions have to be asked usually. This is because originally the grants were set up to be a reimbursement, but this is our way to be able to get away from that reimbursement structure because we know Firewood Banks a lot of people don't have funds to upfront be able to purchase something then ask for reimbursement. So this is kind of how we make that work. And when that's not possible, because sometimes a budget item can't be spent in 2 weeks, we do work with you. We move that timeline. We make sure everything is going correctly. And then a final report. And this is just accounting for the rest of the funds. It comes 6 months after the opening date. So for new applicants and for startups, that would be at around November, I believe. That's when your final report will be due. Just accounts for the rest of the funds. Everything over $250, we ask for a copy of like a receipt, so a scan or a picture. We ask for, a picture of the equipment. And then we really just want to gauge the impact. Like, how did the grants impact? Did you process more wood? Did you get more seasoned wood? Did you increase safety practices? And then we ask for your opinions. Like, how can we make this process better? Do you have any comments on how we might be able to expand, that kind of deal? And so I'll just quickly walk you through kind of how to apply because it's kind of a quick process. One, firewoodbanks.org, go through that whole website, check it out before you open an application, go through the frequently asked questions, go through the resources, the overview, really look at that apply now page all the way to the bottom because it goes over eligible expenses and it goes over a guideline document that kind of breaks out what we need or require from you. And then you're just going to choose who you are. Are you a new applicant or a startup grant? That's going to take you to our platform we use, which is Email Me form. And you'll go over these kind of groups of questions. So organizational contact information. This is, the physical location of your Firewood Bank, the mailing address, the primary contact, the secondary contact, that kind of deal. Then your missions and operations. How much are you processing? How many people are you delivering or receiving whatever wood? How many volunteers you have? And then we'll go over, safety and health impact requirements. This is where you're going to list what kind of materials you already have, so safety equipment. And then we'll go over financial requirements. That's just kind of giving the name of your fiscal sponsor or your bank account and who you bank with. And then the grant request budgets. This is just, we have a template for this as well. So we're trying to make it as easy as possible to do. Some of the big things is that we'd like to see this in an Excel or a Google Sheet, because we do want a URL link to each item that you are requesting. So each item, line item. If it's something like logs, this we'd request putting a quote, so maybe attaching something that says, this is what we've been quoted by our local log company. And to go back to Josh's question, we do so something that's not eligible is to buy commercial deliveries of wood. So saying, oh, we have these families and we'd like to take the funds and buy a $300 cord here, here, and here. That's not an eligible expense. If that is you as a firewood bank kind of mixing it in to supplement, we don't care. We just want to know if it's an eligible expense or not, and that one is not. So you can buy like logs, a load of logs. That's totally cool, but it just can't be a commercial firewood already there. And then reasons for denial, we have a super short thing that says, listen, there are not very many reasons you're going to be denied. If you send in an application and we see something is maybe not correct or something's missing, we're going to contact you and try to work with you to make it work. And we'll probably have a lot of questions, but we're trying to make this work. Like I said, not many reasons that you're not going to get the funds. And then photos, of course. You'll see on our firewoodbanks.org, we love to showcase our grantees. The U.S. Forest Service always asks us, what photos do you have to use? We want to be able to quickly get them to them so they can get the mission out there. And so that's about it. Seems like a lot, but it can go pretty quickly if you come into the application knowing what's required of you. And so once you submit that, you're going to get a success message. And Josh, let me know if I should cut this short once we go over this hour limit. Just jump in. Okay. But you're gonna get contacted by Pam Porter within 2 weeks, probably even sooner. She might ask you some clarifying questions. So maybe you forgot a link in the grant budget request form. Maybe there was something weird about your fiscal sponsor, your mission, or how you're set up. So she'll probably ask some clarifying questions. But if it goes on through there, she'll set up an introductory call. And this is kind of where you get to know us. You get to ask us all the questions, or Pam, not us. Pam all the questions, and she'll ask you a lot of questions to verify any kind of application questions we had. And then once that's done, Pam goes through kind of a checklist to make sure, there's no burn bans currently. Is your UEI up to date and it's current on sam.gov? So she goes through this whole list of things, sends it off to our president, John Ackerley. He approves the grant, tells Pam, hey, approved, great. And then Pam will contact you saying, you've been approved for funds, here's an implementation guide, and we'll be sending the contract through DocuSign, which is like a secure document signer certification thing. The primary contact is the signee. Sometimes it's a little different. They'll sign it, John will sign it, and then you'll get a message saying, contract signed, everything's good, and the funds will be wired to your bank account. And then we ask you to kind of verify, did you get the funds, yes or no? Because sometimes those bounce, sometimes those get lost, and we want to make sure they get to you successfully. And that is it. That is the application procedure. It can go quickly or it can be drawn out. It really depends how you're set up and if you're prepared. So definitely take a look at that application. You can open it up and you can save and resume later for 30 days. And you'll have that link. If you lose that link, I can also find that for you. So no big deal. But yeah, any questions?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks so much, Darian. And yeah, you answered my question. And I didn't do a great job of asking it, but yeah, so I was thinking if if a community with a firewood bank, processed wood, did it have to be their own wood from their own community, or could they take it from a project site that's being implemented by a contractor managed by a forester with a nonprofit partner organization 10 miles away? And it sounds like that answer is yes. So
yeah. And the other thing is that, like I said, often with eligibility, we'll have something new and unique that we've never approved before. And so we just have to talk about it and be like, yeah, that works or that doesn't work. So we're super responsive, and we have like twice weekly meetings where we're discussing these things often. So if you have something creative of how you want to set up your firewood bank, we really encourage that. We think it's great because, like Jessica said, it works for your community, then we should make it work as well for the funding.
Awesome. Thanks. So, and yeah, we're good. I actually scheduled this meeting for an hour and a half. So we got some time for questions. And we'll take questions. Let me kick it off with one, which some of you might be thinking, chimney sweeps. Are they eligible to hire somebody to do a chimney sweep for someone who might be on the beneficiary end of, wood from a firewood bank? Thoughts around that? Has that come up?
That is a really, really good question because actually, we recently talked about encouraging chimney, like chimney, what would you call it? The technical equipment that they use, encouraging it for like self-cleaning, like including it in the budget. So we want to distribute this many chimney sweeping materials for our people. We've never had someone actually include a professional chimney cleaning in the budget. So that would be a very good question to be able to discuss. A huge part, we've recently hired someone, our energy equity program manager, who is really hoping to link people with existing community resources and services that typically low-income people are already eligible for, but don't have the bandwidth to apply for, or actually just don't know about it. And so when we talk about maybe some repairing, like in WAP, like weatherization assistance program, connecting them with people that are already doing this kind of thing. But Josh, that is a very, very good idea. We've talked with Firewood Banks to be like, can you expand these services? Can you go in and inspect wood stoves? And the question is always about liability and safety and how that would work. We've also talked about, could we pay for someone to get trained at the Firewood Bank to be able to do this and be certified? That's definitely something we're talking about, but that would be very interesting.
Cool. And Jessica, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, I will end with a question for Darian, but I want to amplify what she's saying about the grant manager, Pam Porter. So it's when Darian shoots all that stuff at you, it can be intimidating. If you want to start a firewood bank and there's something on that list that just feels intimidating, reach out to Pam Porter because she knows how she will like sit with you and get you walk you through the UEI process. She can help brainstorm who your fiscal sponsor might be. Darian talked about you don't have a safety plan. Well, there's a template. You don't have a liability form. We got a template for that. So anything that you're like, I love this, I want to do this, but reach out to Pam, have a discussion, and see if you might work through it. But Darian, my question for you is, if communities want to take a little longer to talk, the grant is or been open since May 1st. If communities want to take a little time to work through their organization, what's the future for these grants? Will there be more opportunities?
Thank you. Thank you for that question. So right now, applications are a rolling basis, so there's no deadline for this year. But in the future, yes. So we have 2 more years after the 2024-2025 that Firewood Bank funding will be available for sure. Like it's a 5-year program for sure, guaranteed funding, as long as everything goes correctly. So if you can't get it this year, apply next year. Things will be maybe slightly different. Every once in a while, we add a new requirement like we did for the emergency information sheet, but otherwise it kind of stays the same. The amount may change. Like last year, we had 20,000 as the top amount. We went back down to 15,000 like we did the first year. So those little things will change. But this year, rolling basis all the way through until we run out of money. So we always say quicker the better. But also, if you want to think about it, you have the next 2 years as well. That should be pretty good. Yeah.
Cool. Great. Any questions from someone in the audience? Thomas, do I see your hand up? Sorry. Okay. Patrice, go ahead.
I was thinking of when you have a place for like a shed or a carport and you're seasoning the wood and you've got it on land that's mitigated around it. Have there ever been concerns by neighbors or in the neighborhood of that actually, I'm thinking of farming, where it gets too hot inside or too hot and actually could cause a fire or be not a good thing for if a wildfire comes through because it would heat up the front. I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking through my head of what I'm going to hear from the community if we want to start a place to be seasoning wood. I'm predicting what I'm going to hear from the community. So does anybody know what the
I
dangers would be?
I've never heard this actually. And I mean, we often ask people, you know, what does a firewood bank mean to your community? Have you had any bad feedback? And no one has. Jessica, I don't know if you've ever had this question before. Firewood.
I think I would, this is, so Colorado State has a forestry program, and this would be for who, I think it would be a great question for whoever's teaching tree biology or maybe the forest operations person. So the stem of a tree is 50% water. And so I think when you do have these forest fires, they're either dead trees, standing dead trees from beetle kill and things like that, or they're taking advantage of other aspects of the tree, but other than this half water piece of wood, which you're trying to dry to about 20% or 20% or lower. So I but again, I feel a little out of my element not being in fire country. So you've got so many people I think that would love to help you with this. And so I'd sort of pitch that as a thought question for the CSU forestry faculty to work on here.
Yeah, and if I can offer a comment too, it's a great question, Patrice, and thinking around, what comments might come into play, as you guys discuss this in your community. And really I'd say, and you heard Darian and Jessica talk about a safety plan and a safety coordinator and those aspects of that wood bank. What I'd recommend is get with your fire district, to talk to them about, this idea of a firewood bank, and get their thoughts and opinions too on ways where you can house these things that you can do to help reduce that risk of fire. I think for sure that there are things that you can do that can be done to help minimize, that risk a little bit. So, but it's a great question. And just what I would say is to just talk with, the fire district, get their loop. And honestly too, I'd say that to say, I'd love it if you guys, if you work with your fire districts on this concept as well. I think there's a lot, a benefit to be gained with some of that as well. Any other questions? Let me scan the videos here. I don't see any. Another comment that I'd make, and Darian, thanks so much, and Jessica for your comment too about Miss Pam and her and y'all's willingness to work with our communities. And I'd just say as well, if one of y'all are interested in your neighborhoods and your community setting one of these things up, I'm happy to help as well. Not necessarily write the grant for you. It's not what I mean. But if there's a connection to be made locally, with a nonprofit organization. I mean, you guys, and I'm looking at the folks who's on the call, I know the large majority of you already know who these organizations might be. But if there is some help, that I can make on my end to help connect you to something, happy to help with that as well. And, and I'd say this too, I'm totally interested. If you guys are thinking about this and you do end up in applying, let me know. I'd love to hear your story, learn about it. As through my travels, be able to help educate and inform some other folks who might be interested too. Patrice, you had another question, I think, or you still have your hand up from the last time?
Yeah, I do. So I want to ask Jessica and Darian, who have more experience with people setting up banks. Early on, we heard somebody talking about wood pellets. Do you have experience with any of the wood banks actually processing the wood to make pellets to give to the community? And if there's a way to connect us with them or somehow give us information about how they did that, that would be great.
Because I don't have the answer, I'm gonna go first so Darian can provide the correct answer. I do not know how Alliance for Green Heat will manage that. I do know that there is interest in this. And so this is one that maybe it's not a good fit for Alliance for Green Heat's assistance program, but here's a cool idea that maybe can still run with it. So we have a lot of hardwood, mid-story, understory, diseased beech, things that there would be forest health benefits from thinning the forest. This is often non-merchantable. We still have pretty good wood markets here in Maine, but there's still stuff that would benefit the forest that could be removed. And it would be done with small scale equipment. And the land trusts, who have long had like a preservation or conservation focus, they're interested in this because they're now realizing like maybe we should do this treatment. It almost sounds, there's probably parallels to fire mitigation treatments. So in this case, there's a local wood nonprofit that's working on supporting that removal of non-merchantable hardwood that is then going to go to a hardwood pellet mill, be processed. And because the wood is being donated by the land trust, that wood pellet manufacturer is willing to then sell the wood pellets at a lower cost because they have no wood procurement costs. They're then going to sell it to LIHEAP recipients who want wood pellets for that reduced price. So the benefit for a LIHEAP person who has a wood pellet stove, normally they'd get their funding and they would only be able to buy X number of wood pellets. But if they buy this partnership, land trust, pellet manufacturing, where the wood was donated in a forest health benefit, they're going to actually be able to stretch that LIHEAP money even better. I think that can happen without there's I don't think the Alliance for Green Heat funding doesn't really fit that model, but it's so cool and should happen anyways.
No, this has actually come up. We had someone the first year ask about this. It made John, our president, very excited because he's a big advocate for pellet heating, especially if it's burning cleaner in the house, lower PM. That's it's ideal. He floated it to the U.S. Forest Service. They were like, you know what, this is actually a pretty good idea, but we have not found a way to make it fit into our funding model as it currently is. The biggest deal is that if a firewood bank was interested in expanding and perhaps purchasing equipment, that they could do this on site and have actually ownership of that production and be able to give it away, that could work. But the equipment is so expensive. I believe that was kind of the barrier, that it wouldn't fit into our funding. But I know multiple people have asked about this. Like, is there interest actually in these areas for pellet? And it's like, yeah, there is. And we haven't been able to find a way to make that fit into the giving away wood sources, not having to pay for commercial sources, that kind of model yet. But people have asked this question before. So you're not alone in wondering.
Yeah, and I wouldn't the Alliance for Green Heat funding is it's fabulous because it really can get a firewood bank started. But there are other alternatives like this wood pellet option that, the $10,000 from Alliance for Green Heat isn't going to make or break that wood pellet concept. It's probably going to be this other way of proceeding. So I would, if that's a good fit for your community, I wouldn't get too hung up on the Alliance for Green Heat funding, but in other communities, it is going to be a critical key driver in getting the wood bank started. So, pursue both, decide what works best for your community.
Cool. Yeah, thanks. Good question. Any other questions? Going once? Going twice? I'm a slow auctioneer. So, okay, well, I've got one other slide I want to show, but thanks all for your time, and certainly thanks for our presenters' time. Jessica and Darian, really appreciate you guys being willing to share some of your knowledge with us. And, we've talked around and about, these firewood banks and this idea sort of helping to resolve a biomass challenge following some of the treatments we do. So just wanted to draw your attention to a study that we, Larimer County, are running with and we've started, and that is to better understand locally our challenge with respect to that liability biomass resulting from some of those treatments, and more effectively, efficiently, and through a co-beneficial way use that biomass for some other purpose, whether it's energy like firewood and heating homes, or some other kind of biomass to energy conversion, or some other thing. And so if you're interested at all at that study, You can learn more at that website there on the screen. Also, feel free to just pull out your phone, scan that QR code, and it'll take you to an interest form where you'll fill that out, and it'll drop your email address into our stakeholder list, and you'll start getting emails from us about this project. We just started it. We've hired a consultant organization to help us with it. They've kicked it off, and we've got the project administration things up on plane. And next month, we're going to start pushing out some email newsletter style communications. So if you're interested at all, feel free to learn a little bit more about our study and strategy project, here. And one of the things where I think this Firewood Bank concept applies to where, we're going to be looking at things at different scales and at different readiness levels. So some things might be bigger scale, but they might take a little bit more time to implement here locally through economic development kind of incentive packages, working with industry and helping to, boost certain markets or something like that. It'll take some time, but there's other things that we can do, a lot quicker at maybe a different scale. So, such as a Firewood Bank, these kind of concepts. So, learn more there, and we'll be pushing out some info on that. Let me scan videos. Cool. I don't see any final questions. So, really, truly, again, thanks for y'all's time. And Jessica and Darian, really appreciate your knowledge as well. And yeah, so that concludes the webinar, and best of luck to those of you who are going to have conversations about firewood banks and potentially, applying for the grant through Alliance for Green Heat. So let me know, and if there's some way I can help, feel free to give me a shout. Okay.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks
Bye,
for having
everyone.
us. Feel free to
Thank
reach out.
you.
Bye.